agency will always be there. No matter what decisions you have, rules and commandments and covenants that we make, your agency is never taken away. But the question really is, who or what am I going to be giving that agency to? I'm making the choice to follow Christ. It takes that struggle. It takes that journey to figure that out. But ultimately, we do have the choice to make those decisions. And that's the blessing of life. If I choose to follow God, I know that my life will be better for it.
There's core doctrine. Think of it like the roots, right, of a tree. And then you've got the trunk of the tree that's like the core principles of the gospel. And then you have the leaves, which are the practical application, things that we do in our life. And I think that oftentimes people live by the leaves. They're told to do the leafy things, and that has been ground into them. And what they've been told to be obedient to is the leaves. It's an assumption that the leaves are the doctrine and that the leaves are truth, because we've not had spiritual rooting in the doctrine and the principles. That agency can actually be hindered as we are trying to keep the commandments, because what we view as commandments are the leaves, not the doctrine.
Welcome, everybody, to the No Bushel podcast.
No Bushel podcast.
We are your hosts, Big Ben and the Burning Bushman.
Welcome again. Please like and subscribe. We're going to be talking about agency today. Probably certain aspects of agency that you don't think about all the time. Both of us have done some research and study and been thinking about this quite a bit. And specifically kind of the culminating thought that why we wanted to talk about agency was how we sometimes feel restricted within God's commandments and keeping his laws, and why we feel restricted and how that relates to agency and what agency actually is. And anyway, so that's kind of the concept that we're going to be discussing today.
My first thoughts that I kind of want to share really stem from exactly what you just said, that oftentimes we view agency as restrictive. And it's not the fact that we have the choice that we feel is restrictive, but the commandments that we are supposed to be choosing to follow that are restrictive. And why we feel that way. Our society, we crave freedom, right? That's something, especially here in America, that's what we're all about, right? Freedom. We love freedom. We love to have, you think of our Constitution and the Bill of Rights and our freedoms that we enjoy, and we're all about that. And oftentimes when we look at rules and laws, whether it's from a political landscape of the country, or from a religious standpoint, or even you go to even smaller, and just like your family, right? Your parents had rules when you were a kid. We often view those rules and laws and commandments as restrictive rather than freeing. We want to be able to just do whatever we want. And in my opinion, we have gotten to a point where we would rather have quote unquote freedom without any consequences. And that is kind of the antithesis of agency in my mind, where agency is actually what leads us to freedom if we choose the right direction.
So we need to maybe define terms, because we use the term agency a lot in the church. And I think that we sometimes mean different things. And what you said, this antithesis, that people actually think they're more free because they have all these choices, but that they're taking the consequences away. And so it's actually not even really agency, because there's no consequence. That's Satan's plan, right? That's what his goal was, to not have consequences. And thus, we can do whatever we want and still be saved in the kingdom of heaven, right? So this has been a lot of my study this week, has been thinking about, okay, what is agency? We often use the term in conjunction with agency and accountability. What's the most common way we, like in church, how would you define agency? When someone asks in the front of class, what is agency?
Like the ability to choose right and wrong, basically.
The ability to choose. And I feel like you added that in right and wrong, between right and wrong, which is good. But
agency itself is just being able to choose, period.
Well, I'm actually glad that you added the right and wrong on there, because we also have to recognize that agency is a modern word. It's actually not a scriptural word, with the exception of Doctrine and Covenants, which is more modern because it was Joseph Smith's time era. But okay, so if agency is just choice, then does your agency increase by every new flavor of toothpaste that comes out?
No.
So, and I think
right?
that different people could debate that, right? Like the more options you have, then the more agency you have. And as I've studied, I've tried to grapple with that. It's like, okay, is agency really just the fact that I have more choices to make? And I don't think it is. And
okay, I see where you're going with that. Yeah.
I think that agency grows and constricts, not based on how many choices we have necessarily, but based on what we are accountable and responsible for.
What choices we have made.
Yes. And so maybe if we go back to Adam and Eve, right? So we often say that God gave Adam and Eve their agency in the Garden of Eden. Did they have as many choices as we have today?
Absolutely not. We have way more things.
Right? Like you go to the store, you can buy whatever you want, like and do all these things. We think we have all this agency, if you will.
Yeah.
Adam and Eve, he gave them their agency. But how did he do that? Like, it was just a single choice that they had, right? It's like, you do this, don't do this.
Yeah.
Right? And then let them choose. But that choice, he gave them the capacity to choose between things that would progress them towards good or things that would progress them towards evil, things that would progress them towards God or things that would progress them towards Satan. So in my mind, as I've like tried to get to the root of what the definition of agency is, it really does include that aspect of being able to choose between right and wrong and having the consequences to those, the accountability to those, that whatever I choose is going to draw me nearer to God or it's going to draw me nearer to Satan.
Right.
And if the choice doesn't affect those two things, then I don't know that it really affects overall.
Like, is it increasing your agency or decreasing it? But not. You bring up a good point that as I want to focus on Adam and Eve a little bit, because there's a quote that Joseph Fielding Smith gave way back when. We were talking about this in seminary a few weeks ago, and oftentimes, I'll come back to the quote in just a second, but oftentimes I think Eve gets a bad rap for her role in what we call the fall, right? That she committed the first sin, right? By partaking of the fruit and then getting Adam to partake of the fruit. And interestingly enough, we call it the fall of Adam more than the fall of Eve, because for whatever reason. But one of the things that differs in our kind of our theology and the way we view Adam and Eve is that Eve, the action of taking the fruit was not a sin, but it was a transgression. And there is a difference between the two. And the quote that Joseph Fielding Smith said is that when he looks at that scenario that happened, that event, he views Eve's actions, what he says is God gave them a commandment, gave him instruction, and said, go forth and multiply and replenish the earth. And here's this tree. It's got some fruit. It's probably good. It tastes good. But if you eat it, then here are the consequences that happen. And if you do partake of the fruit, those consequences will occur. You will be kicked out of the garden. You will be out of my presence, and you will die. And Eve, knowing what the consequences were going to be, maybe not fully grasping exactly what was going to happen, but having been told the consequences that would be given to her, made the choice to partake of the fruit. And that goes exactly with what you're talking about with the accountability, like knowing that there would be consequences, but understanding to a certain extent what those were, choosing to follow through with that. And it, in the end, allowed her to actually obey God's commandments more fully, because then they could then have children and experience life like we all do.
And as she followed God's path, agency begets more agency and more accountability and able to understand even some of the prior decisions at a deeper level. Right? So baptism. So we often say that 8 years old is the age of accountability. And I've often wondered, like, what does that really mean? Like, okay, you're accountable, but are you accountable for everything? Are you accountable for, like, and it's like, okay, the hard cutoff of 8, it's like, okay, well, you got a 7-year-old, a 7.5-year-old, are they not accountable in anything? You know, like,
Mhm.
and then the older you get, and accountability does increase. And I think where, we baptize children at 8 because they're accountable enough. They can grasp the concept of decisions that they make and the choices that there are consequences to things. And they can grasp the fact that they want to follow God. They want to keep his commandments. They want to take his name upon them. And they have enough of an understanding that they can honestly commit to something.
Sure.
Does that mean that they have as much agency or accountability as, the prophet? No, absolutely not. Like they're at a much earlier stage, but that agency grows. And so kind of tying this back into why people struggle when, we have these two options, there's this conflict within us of really don't want to do that thing, even though I've been told to do it. So let's maybe bring this to like an actual example. I don't want to go to church. I really struggle. Like it's not fun. I'm not close to anybody. I'm not, I don't feel it. I don't feel the Spirit while I'm there. And there's this other side of me that's like, I know I'm told to go to church. I know I'm probably supposed to go to church, but I really just don't want to go to church. And so where does that conflict come from in understanding agency, and how can we overcome that? So I have lots of thoughts in my mind here, so I'm sorry if I'm a little bit sporadic. But so you have that individual who's struggling with, and we all have things like that in our lives, right? Like there's things that we have a harder time with or an easier time with. In regard to agency, when we choose something that is not in line with God's commandments, you could say, okay, you have these two choices, and so you feel like God's restricting you because he's not letting you do this thing.
Or he's making you do something else. Like he's asking you to go
or
to
he's
church.
asking you to do something else. But the trick is that we think of agency in terms of like, I should be able to have the choice to do either of these. And basically he's restricting me and he's only leaving me with this option. And so that's limiting my agency. If that's how we view things, then it's going to be harder to make that decision. But if we can recognize that every time that we choose to follow God, it's true that, this one option here maybe goes out, like we're, okay, that's not an option. But this option flowers into 10 options. Does that make sense? Like sure. It grows from there in agency each time that we draw closer to God in whatever decision we're making, while we leave some things behind that we could think are restricting us. So many more paths are opening up to us that we don't realize. And because we don't see those additional paths, we don't realize the effect it's having on our agency.
I would go a little bit further with that when we look at when we look at this particular scenario, oftentimes we feel like the choice is not there, that God is forcing us to make the choice. I have to go to church. I have to repent. I have to live a specific way. And I think we forget that that's not true. Should we make those decisions? Yes, that's what he's hoping that we will do. But he has never and will never force us to make those decisions. That is the point of agency. Is he says, here's what I'd like you to do. I'm going to give you some benefits. I'll give you some consequences. Choose for yourself. Is this what you'd like to do? Knowing full well that this is, here are some of the consequences, or here are some of the blessings, depending on what choice you make. And we often see those commandments, him asking us to do something, as forcing us to make that decision, when really we're putting the restriction on ourselves. Let me give you another example. Less spiritual and more just kind of everyday life. Think of when you're a kid, your parents tell you the stove's hot, don't touch the stove. You could view that as restrictive. I want to go touch the stove. I want to go jump in the deep end of the pool. My mom says don't, because I haven't learned how to swim. There's all these little things that you can look back at your parents said, don't go do X, Y, Z. And I can view that as, you are not allowing me to go touch the stove. Even though you've told me it's hot, it's going to hurt me if I touch it. But because you've told me that, I feel like you're restricting me. Even though I still have the ability to go touch the stove, I can still go choose it. But you, as my parent, know what's going to happen if I do it. And then it comes to my willingness to either follow what my parent asks me to do or not and reap the consequences, whichever direction we go.
For sure. So I might say something controversial.
I love it. Go for it.
I'm not sure if this is going to be controversial or not, but I'm not even sure if I'm going to get this out the way that I want to get this out. Sometimes I think that we tie specific actions, things that are done, to sin. So let's just say you see a naked woman. Okay. Some people will see a naked woman and they will feel sinful for having seen that. Okay. Yeah. And regardless of the circumstances. And I think that that's not always appropriate, right? Because there was no intention of like let's just say it's an innocent, you came into something and somehow you saw
it pops up on your feed and you're like,
whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Pops up on the feed and suddenly you feel kind of icky inside and you're like, oh, that was not good. And people will feel like they have sinned because there has been an act upon them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I think we need to be careful to recognize that sin is not always the act, but is often the intention behind an act. The reason I mention this is, I like your examples. And I think in certain aspects of agency, I think that really applies. It's like, you don't want to break the commandments. And so because breaking the commandments will hurt you, right? Is kind of the idea there.
So like what you're getting, I think, is, am I touching the stove just to spite my parents versus am I touching the stove on accident or out of a learning experience versus just saying, well, to heck with you, Mom, I'm just going to go touch the stove because you said not to.
And there's a spiritual maturity aspect here where when we so I actually think that sometimes people keep commandments without the spiritual maturity to really keep that commandment, and their mindset actually hinders them in that process rather than benefiting them in that process. So we tend to always think you should always keep the commandments, and that as you keep the commandments, you will feel the Spirit and then learn by and large that you should follow and keep following those commandments, right? And this is the controversial part feel free to push back on this because I'm not exactly sure where this goes, but the idea that if you're not spiritually ready for that, so like I've known individuals who have done what they are told their whole life. And because they've done what they were told, they never developed a sense of self, a spiritual self. And because they never developed a spiritual self, then they get into their, mid 40s, 50s, and suddenly they realize I've always just done this for other people. And while they were there, they would have said like, I'm choosing this or I'm doing this and I'm trying to exercise my agency. They do these things, but then push come to shove, they have this crisis where they realize, yeah, I wish I would have thought a little bit more about some of these things. And you could say, well, they protected themselves from whatever it was. But on the flip side, now they're apostate and struggling with what's real and what's not real. And I see that quite frequently in individuals. And is that, like, you don't want to tell people not to keep the commandments, right? Like we should strive to keep the commandments, but sometimes there are certain types of commandments that I think are more. So okay, we talked about a while back. There's core doctrine. Think of it like the roots, right?
Yeah.
Of a tree, and then you've got the trunk of the tree that's like the core principles of the gospel, and then you have the leaves, which are the practical application things that we do in our life. And I think that oftentimes people live by the leaves. They're told to do the leafy things, and they're
not the roots are not strong. They're in the leaves, like you said, but there's not a structure that's holding them that is the core of what they actually feel or believe or live by.
Exactly. And because of that, they still have this mindset like they need to be obedient. And that's been ground into them. Like, I need to be obedient. I need to be obedient. I need to be obedient. And what they've been told to be obedient to is the leaves. And suddenly they get to be their 40s or 50s, and they realize they've been following the leaves, but then culture and other things change. And suddenly they're realizing like, why am I well, why am I still wearing Sunday clothes on Sunday? Or why am I still, like whatever it is, that's just a silly example. And I still wear Sunday clothes on Sunday. So you can laugh at me. That concept that if it's an assumption that the leaves are the doctrine and that the leaves are truth. And with that mismatch, because we've not had spiritual rooting in the doctrine and the principles, that agency can actually be hindered as we are trying to keep the commandments, because what we view as commandments are the leaves, not the doctrine.
So I'll continue my stove analogy here, because I think it applies here to what you're saying, that if we are told, don't touch the stove because it's always hot, for the rest of our life, we never touch the stove because it's always hot. I've never touched the stove. I don't know how to use the stove, and I never learned how to cook something. And so, because my mom told me when I was 3 years old, don't touch the stove, I just said, I'm just never going to touch the stove. I'm always going to obey my mom's rule, don't touch the stove. And that has actually hindered me, because I haven't, not that still touching the stove itself, the core doctrine would be, it's going to burn me and I shouldn't do that. However, I can learn how to use the stove in a proper, productive way with your, don't actually touch it with your hands, but you can put a pot on there and you can put the water in the pot and boil and cook something. And so if we allow just the leaf analogy, where I'm just going to do only this one thing, but not actually experience life and learn and grow and figure out, why is the stove hot? What's the purpose of the stove being hot? How does that actually help me? How do these core doctrines affect the decisions in my life that I'm going to make? Then if I don't do those things, then that's where the hindrance comes. But if I take the time to learn and to grow and to understand that core, those roots, then I can say, oh, the stove is actually a beautiful thing. It can hurt me in one way, but it can actually be a huge benefit and give me, great food and sustenance and life and something I can enjoy.
I love the continuation of that parable. And with that, when we then have these moments in life when we're struggling with something like, I really want to do that, or I don't want to do that, we can then try to recognize the core principles that are associated with that teaching and align ourselves to that. So, okay, this is going to feel like I'm changing subjects, but I'm not. Who was the first president of the United States?
George Washington.
George Washington. How do you know that?
Because we talked about this the other day, because history tells us, right? We've read it in our books.
But who wrote that history book?
I have no clue.
Yeah, right. So the idea being that we know a whole lot of things that we just take on based on trust of other individuals that have done things, right? We trust people, and trust affects how we choose in whatever decisions we make. So, for example, you can watch a pharmacology ad on TV, right? They're so frequently. I don't know. Do you get those all the time? I get those all the time on Pandora. Okay, so you get an ad. It has like the happy-go-lucky people, and they're so happy because they're on this drug. And then they're at the end, this still keeps the video with them being super happy. And then it's like and you will die a very serious, painful death if you ever take this drug. Like all the side effects of the drug. And then it cuts back to the happy people with the happy music, and you just got to take the drug. And most people are like, at least I shouldn't say most people, it has to work for some people. In my mind, I'm like, why would anybody take that drug? That sounds horrible. Like there's so many terrible side effects. But then like you go to a doctor and you discuss you're having some issues with something, and suddenly the doctor says, you know what, you actually would be a good candidate for this drug because it will help you with ABC. And there's somebody that you trust, and they're telling you to do this, and this thing that you never would have done before, you're trusting them to do it, and it's easier to do, right? And so often I think within the culture of the church and in context of agency, we talk a lot about agency and like we want to give people freedom, and then people feel like, but you're just telling me what to do, and you're just telling me what to do. And what we need to do in those cases is, instead of harping on them and yelling at them, yeah, you got to just do it. You just got to do it. We need to connect them back to the source of their trust. And if we realize that, okay, if I'm having trouble with something and I'm not exactly sure what the right thing is, and there's a lot of conflict in me, rather than white knuckling, willpowering it through, there's a lot of willpower in the church that culturally, I think, where we feel like we have to keep up with others or do things, and we just kind of willpower ourselves through it. And that's not what that's not what the plan of salvation is about. It's not about doing things just by sheer grit. It's about a relationship that we have with the divine, and that as we draw near to the divine, our desires, our hopes, our actions naturally want to become what they want. And it goes back to those roots, the core, the branches. And so those things that we've been told, this is how you should keep this commandment, or this is how you should do this thing, those leaves that we find hard to do, it grounds us.
I'm going to shift just a little bit. Still kind of continuing this idea, but as I've got this image of the tree that you talked about, I'm thinking about structure and how part of the conversation we're having is agency, is the ability to choose, allowing us to have freedom, or is it restricting us? And is one or the other actual freedom, or is it actually creating some form of chaos? And I would say that the structure that we are given in any case of agency, whether it's spiritual or your mom and dad's structure of don't touch the stove, that structure allows for opened freedom rather than chaos. This is easily viewed when you look at like just a social landscape. If we had no laws, anybody could do anything. There's no consequences. There's no jail. So you can go kill, steal, cheat, lie, do whatever you want. There's no consequences. That's chaos. You just open the doors to anything. But society, we have rules and we have laws that we have to live by. And even though in America we are the land of the free, we still have laws that keep us that way so that we can still continue to be free. If we were to, now there are certain laws that we want to stay away from, because then it would restrict our freedom. And that's part of the way our country is built. But in general, the structure allows for liberty rather than for chaos. And I think it's important to remember that while those things are hard to, sometimes we struggle with the structure. We struggle with the things that you're just supposed to do. But oftentimes when you, let's say you are just living in the leaves and you choose to go a different direction, you let go of your branch and you float away to a different tree, all of a sudden you have no idea what you're getting into, and there's consequences. Sometimes that leaf dies, or sometimes you're planted into a totally unfamiliar territory that ends up being very negative and destructive, all because you didn't want to stay in the root, in the trees, and where you belonged and began. And I think it's important that we remember that structure is actually beneficial rather than the restriction that we often think it is.
No, I like that. It's kind of related to what I was saying at the beginning, how you have these two initial choices, and this one limits you, and this one will expand, and kind of that concept. So I've thought a lot about our posture towards God and His commandments, and how our posture can affect the way that we see things and our reaction to others as they teach these things. So I want you to envision a spectrum. And on one side of the spectrum, you've got apathy, nihilism. You just don't really care. In the middle of the spectrum, you've got ambivalence, which is where there's real conflict within a person's soul, where they're really struggling with what's right, what's not right, wanting to do things, but also not
knowing how.
Exactly. Yeah. And then on the other side, you have zealotry, where they're hardcore, and so hardcore that they beat you down.
Yeah.
Okay. And I made the realization recently, it was actually while we were at a conference, that it was totally talking about totally different topic of all things hearing aid sales. We were talking about hearing aid sales, but this just like totally lit up my mind, and I've been thinking about it since. I have been, I've been guilty of calling people apathetic. It's not like I call people out, but like just in general, I feel like there's a lot of apathy in the church, and I realized that I do think that there is apathy within the church, but I think that I have misdiagnosed a good chunk of people, maybe even the bulk of people. And I don't think they're as apathetic as they are ambivalent. And I've realized as I've studied that ambivalence is actually really good. It means that you are humble enough not to be the zealotry guy, so you can still accept where you're going off and where you're not quite right. But you're not, you're not so apathetic that you don't care about anything. Like you really do care. And you just have these conflicting ideas and these conflicting thoughts in your mind that cause you to struggle and wrestle with that thing. And I think that that's so valuable and so important that we stay in that realm of apathy, because that I think is a huge aspect of our purpose in life. But here's the trick, is that we as leaders, when we talk with other people or we try to promote or encourage people to live certain gospel principles, depending on who you're talking with and what their posture is towards truth, you can really turn them off, or you can turn them on, because it's very different. If you're dealing with an apathetic person versus an ambivalent person, it's going to be a very different approach. And it's going to be a very different approach if someone that's a zealot. And I went through the New Testament and many of the experiences of Christ, and I tried to pinpoint, okay, who here is ambivalent, who here is apathetic, and who here is a zealot? Because obviously, the scribes and Pharisees, they were zealots, and Christ dealt with them in a pretty serious, significant, calling them out way, right?
Yeah.
So oftentimes, what I think the more often thing that we naturally do, especially within the church, what I think is pretty common, is that we think that people are apathetic when they're actually ambivalent, and so we treat them as if they're apathetic rather than treating them like they're ambivalent. And what I think that does in a negative way is we just we think they're just, we pound it into them. You're like, oh, you just got to do it. You just got to do it. Just make the jump, live the commandments and willpower through it or whatnot. There's something called the righting reflex that we've learned about recently. And when somebody...
It's that pendulum swing, right? Someone says something and you're like, oh, that's not right. So I've got to fix it. And sometimes you got to back away and just give them time and let them figure it out.
The fact that they're ambivalent means that they care. That's a good thing. The only reason that there is conflict within them is because they genuinely care. And we need to let that work within them and let them talk themselves through their own struggles and their own worries, and just be that support and, pat them on the back. You've got this, you're going to be okay. Don't worry about it. Keep praying, keep studying. I'm not going to tell you what to do. You need to make these decisions on your own, but I believe in you, and I'm going to love you either way, whatever you decide to do.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? And when we give people that freedom and that openness when they're ambivalent, then that opens them up to be able to feel secure and able to get through whatever it is that they're struggling with and wrestling with at that moment. Vice versa. If I said that, okay, and if I say, it's okay, you don't need to worry about it, everything's going to be just fine, but you're truly apathetic, is that going to do anything?
Absolutely not.
It's not going to help one bit. Those that are truly apathetic, they really could care less.
Just don't care.
And the only way to improve that is to either have a humiliating, humbling experience that pulls them back into needing a sense of meaning,
right,
or purpose, and we have to help them. And sometimes, most of the time, it's bringing them along with us. It's come to the service project with me. Come do this thing with me. Just let's be physical together. Let's do the Lord's work. Just to do it together, and then in that process, they can hopefully find some meaning and some purpose,
some enjoyment out of that. Yeah. And oftentimes that's what it is, right? You have to just force them into, grab your buddy and say, you're just coming to, let's go. And we're going to go do whatever it is. And that does make a difference. The distinction between apathy and ambivalence is definitely an interesting one. That I think I fall in that ambivalence fairly often. I'm just thinking even outside the spiritual realm, my weight loss goals and health goals and whatnot. I know what I'm supposed to do, and I know I want to do something, but how do I do it? Am I doing it the right way? Am I, I think we all fall into that fairly often. And so it's kind of reassuring to know that I do care. And I think
Yeah.
most people do care, just are lost in how to get there. And so I think you're right that having someone there that's able to just be a constant companion and be reassuring while you're on your journey is very beneficial. So if you don't have someone that's like that, try and find someone, reach out, take a leap of faith and reach out to someone and say, hey, I need a pal. I need somebody to help out. And maybe you need to be that person for somebody else too.
Absolutely. So in my mind, ambivalence is actually a really good place to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just telling people that, like the fact that you're wrestling with this is actually a
good
really
thing.
good thing. It's healthy and needed. And it's a process it's a maturational process.
Mm.
And so don't overly stress that, but be humble. And I think that's, so the difference I've thought about the sides. So I think that both of the sides that I outlaid there with zealotry and apathy, those are kind of negative things on both sides. And I think if we are prideful in our ambivalence, it's going to lead us one of those two directions. Yeah. However, if we are humble in our struggles, in that ambivalence, then I think we can still go either direction, but it's a little bit different. Instead of zealotry, it's a zeal, a positive excitement and passion and like diving full feet in, but still with humility and recognizing when maybe you go a little too far, or when you're checking yourself with that humility. And then on the other side, positive aspect of apathy, I would say, is like childlike trust, where you still don't have the answers, but you're at peace with where you're at. And right now is not the time. You don't need to be super passionate about this right now, but you trust God and you are confident that in time things will work out. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, again, I'm going to go back to the stove analogy, like that childlike feeling of just, I know mom's right. Like mom cares about me. I'm just going to accept that for now. I don't know how to cook pasta, or I don't know how to cook anything on the stove, but I can trust that she's right and she's just looking out for me. And this is the right path to follow at this moment. And as I grow and understand and have a strong relationship with mom, eventually she's going to bring me to the stove and we're going to cook and I'm going to learn.
Yeah. So bring this to a gospel lens, right? There are certain things in church history that people struggle with. And you know what? That's good. It's good to have that ambivalence. Like there are tricky things that we don't fully understand. And there are some people, so let's just, because it's an easy one, polygamy, right? So that's something that most people have some ambivalence towards because it's a tricky topic. And I have known individuals who have done their due diligence and they have wrestled and looked into all the historical writings and experiences, and they have gone out of ambivalence where they don't have that tension or that struggle anymore, but they've gone towards zeal, where they actually have like this positive respect and love and admiration for those that went through it, and with an understanding and recognition that it's not commanded today, but that it has been in the past. But it has been in the past, and they're okay and proud of that. Okay, but then I've also seen individuals go the other direction where maybe they've studied it in depth or tried to, but it's been such a emotional and struggling, excruciating experience for them that it's actually led them to, maybe they've had an experience, maybe they've been praying about it, seeking God's will, and God just like bestows upon them that spirit that just consumes them and says, it's okay. You don't need to worry about this right now. If I needed to change your mind, I could, but right now is not the time. And they are then out of that ambivalent stage, but they're not apathetic towards it. They just, they have a childlike trust in that.
And that's valuable. The struggle is valuable. The struggle of learning and growing, and that's what life's about, right? Going back, if we're talking about agency, that's our life is about how we use our agency, how we struggle with choices and understanding and learning and growing, and then how that evolves us into the people that we're becoming. those choices and those struggles allow us to learn, become Christ-like as he asks us to do. And as we do that, we have a greater understanding, not just of every single topic, but just an understanding of who Christ is, and how that can affect our life in every way, regardless of what doctrinal topic you're discussing or life experience you're going through. It's that struggle that is so real and powerful and moving. How do we use that struggle to benefit ourselves in our eternal growth? And that's what I think of. I also think about how sometimes when we make those decisions in an extreme way, either on your zealotry side or your apathy side, that there are situations where our agency is limited because of our choices. And these are things that Satan wants us to get to. There are certain things in life that take away our agency to a certain degree. So for instance, like addiction, right? When someone's addicted to something, drugs or alcohol, or I mean, you could be addicted to just about anything, then your ability to choose to get out of that situation is very much diminished. Sin and debt, those are all examples of where your agency is really severely limited. You can still choose to get out of those things, but it just, those types of things make it so much more difficult to find that growth that you've been looking for. Now, when you, in those cases, the individual that does come out of that can overcome an addiction, that can overcome enormous amounts of debt, or has serious sins that they have repented of and come unto Christ, that struggle, that process of being redeemed through Christ, through those experiences, is typically even more powerful and spiritually growing than anything they could have done before, because of how far back, how fallen that individual would have been.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a key point to distinguish is, and you mentioned it earlier, that Satan actually limits our agency, even though sometimes we think it's God because he's given us these laws, but it's Satan who's wanting us to be limited. He's wanting to give us the restrictions, which is why he wants to get everybody addicted. He wants everybody to go get in debt and to sin and to make these mistakes, these bad decisions, because it takes away that ability to choose and learn. Not just ability to choose, but the ability to grow and have that struggle, because then it just, you get stuck.
So I think this is really easy to see in sins that are addictive.
Mm-hmm.
As I was trying to conceptualize certain things this week, I was struggling with this idea of when we choose God, we expand our options and our responsibility and our, and that when we choose Satan, we limit that. But then I thought, well, but is that always true? Because Satan certainly uses disciples too to do a lot of good for his side. Does that make sense? Right?
Yeah.
And so like you can have, influencers who, like they're not addicted to any substances per se. They're still like decent human beings, but they are pushing and promoting these satanic ideas that, and they might be super rich and wealthy and look like they're doing, having the time of their life. And so I was struggling, like, okay, so like it kind of looks like they're expanding their influence too. But the trick kind of goes back to what you said at the beginning, where Satan leads to chaos and Christ leads to order, but that Satan does not support his people in the end.
Right.
And Christ does. Christ is leading us on, and we have trust that he will support us in the end. And we know that Satan will not. Now, I think where the issue then goes back to trust and what we trust in. And people want to trust in the greed and in the wealth and in the sexuality and in the, like people want to trust in those things, but we need to be so careful, because in the end, Satan will not support his people, even if they look happy now.
Yeah, 100% agree. I guess one of my kind of the culminating idea behind what we're talking about here is, when I think of agency, I'm thinking about the ability to choose between right and wrong, as we've discussed, but what agency will always be there, no matter what decisions you have, rules and commandments and covenants that we make, your agency is never taken away. But the question really is, who and or what am I going to be giving that agency to? Am I following? Am I giving my choices? I'm making the choice to follow Christ. Am I making the choice to not? We can say it's black and white. We can say follow Christ or not. And in reality, while that is true, life is much more difficult than just saying do this and do this. It takes that struggle. It takes that journey to figure that out. But ultimately, we do have the choice to make those decisions. And that's the blessing of life, is that we have the ability to choose. We have the ability to follow God. And no matter if it's seen as restrictive or not, if I choose to follow God, I know that my life will be better for it.
2 Nephi 2:27. Wherefore men are free according to the flesh, and all things are given them, which are expedient unto man. And they are free to choose liberty and eternal life through the great mediator of all men, or to choose captivity and death according to the captivity and power of the devil, for he seeketh that all men might be miserable like unto himself. That is what agency is. And we say that God gave man his agency. Adam and Eve, prior to the fall, prior to God giving them those commandments, couldn't progress. There was no moving towards sin. There was no moving towards progression. There were no consequences. There was no accountability. It was just there until God gave them a choice that was actually going to have a consequence, that was going to lead them to know good and evil. And that's the whole process, is we are learning good and evil. And that's why it's a struggle, because we are learning. We're children in the grand scheme of things, and we need to be okay with being children. And so when we have that resistance, when we feel struggle in the moment, first off, take a deep breath, relax, give yourself some space to spiritually mature, and then bind yourself to Christ and look to him and do things that will strengthen your relationship with him. Because as you do that, then you will be humble and you will seek to do his will. And when you don't, you'll learn.
For sure. Yeah. More agency is an equivalent of more accountability and the ability to choose what to do with my freedom. And if commandments and rules were restrictive, if they were restrictive, we wouldn't be able to break them because of what you just said. We have the ability to choose. If we didn't have that choice, then we would just be doing it no matter what. So use your agency, use your choice, struggle, find that struggle within yourself, and figure out which direction you want to go, and enjoy the freedom, the liberty that comes with those choices.
Give yourself the benefit of the doubt and allow yourself to mature. Recognize you are a child. You're not always going to get things right. Be okay striving. That's what life's for.
Yeah.
We strive. This is the No Bushel podcast, guys.
Like and subscribe. We'll see you guys next week.